It's such a fine line between stupid and clever.
It's the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
My name is Sergeant Frank Drebin, Detective Lieutenant Police Squad, a special detail of the police department. There'd been a recent wave of gorgeous fashion models found naked and unconscious in laundromats in the West Side. Unfortunately, I was assigned to investigate holdups of neighborhood credit unions.
If the holdup man had been where Sally Decker said, the bullet should have penetrated deeper. Let me show you what we did. These guns are identical to the one that killed Jim Johnson. Watch carefully as I test fire this gun into these videotapes of Barbara Walters' interviews. You can see it completely destroys the Burt Reynolds interview and everything from Bo Derek to Paul Newman, but only up to the point where Barbara asks him, is it difficult to love? Now, let me show you what happens when the gun is fired from 3 feet, which is the distance Sally claimed the shots were fired from. Notice? Complete destruction. Right up to the point where she asked Katharine Hepburn what kind of tree she'd like to be.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive and in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now, your host, Jeremy Lunnan.
Yeah, we don't know anything about that fella there. Who is he? Where's he coming from?
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. And John, it has been forever.
It's been too long.
Too long. And so it's been a, what's the word we're looking for? It's been a
reunion?
It's a reunion for us. But I mean, it's just been one thing after another that has kept us from getting back together. So it's been like 4 weeks.
It's been a while.
This is the longest hiatus we've had, but absence makes the heart grow fonder.
And also we've had a technology upgrade, right?
We've had a technology upgrade. I don't know if you can hear the difference, but we've upgraded some things in our studio. We've got some, we like the Samson CO1 studio condenser mics.
They're very good.
We got a pair of those, and they don't cost a lot if you are an audio nerd like we are. I had one and really liked it, and so I thought, well, let's get matching sets. So
they sound great.
Yeah, I like them.
Tell us what you think.
I think they sound good, yeah. And so we have promised that we would be covering this Robin Trower Bridge of Sighs album, which we are, but it's given us more time than usual to listen to it, which has been good. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. Now, this is not really news or breaking news, but I was going to tell you about this, John. On YouTube, wasting time on YouTube, as I am wont to do, I saw the Ronnie Montrose tribute concert. Someone has posted that, and I think it happened in around 2015, 2016. I should know that. I didn't even check. He died in 2012. But a bunch of folks got together and played music from his entire career. Stuff he did with Edgar Winter Group, stuff he did with Montrose, stuff he did with Gamma. I started watching that last night about 10:30, and I watched the whole thing.
Really?
It was really, really good.
Is there any stand-up performances?
So it starts with Neil Sean comes out, and he's playing with Ricky Phillips, who is currently in Styx, but was in the Babies, and was in Montrose at one point. So it's Neil Sean, Ricky Phillips, can't remember who else is. So it starts with like them doing a 4-song set of just his instrumental stuff. Ronnie Montrose had an interesting career. He started his first notoriety came playing with Van Morrison. Right. So Wild Nights and, a lot of this great Van Morrison stuff, that's Ronnie Montrose. So that was kind of his first gig. And then Edgar Winter, so Frankenstein,
Right.
Free Ride, that's all Ronnie Montrose. And then he hooks up with Sammy Hagar. He does the Montrose thing for a few albums. And then he went this solo route where he's starting to release instrumental stuff. And then, oh, by the way, in like 79, he gets together. My favorite Montrose period is Gamma. And it was not very commercially successful, but there were 3 excellent albums. And to me, the high point of this show is the Gamma set. Mm-hmm. And there's a connection with the album we'll talk about. Is the singer in Gamma is a guy named Davey Pattison, who is awesome. And in fact, has been Robin Trower's lead singer for the last 20 years.
Wow.
And here's what's funny is my first exposure to Robin Trower was back in the 90s. I saw a live video of Robin Trower playing. Davey Pattison's the singer. They're singing Bridge of Sighs. They're singing Day of the Eagle. They're singing Two Rolling Stone, all this stuff. And his voice is so similar to James Dewar, who's the actual singer. I thought Pattison was the original singer. Yeah. I really did. But he's a great singer. That part of the Montrose show with Davey Pattison and Montrose, obviously Ronnie's passed away, so they don't have him. But there's a guitar player named Mark Bonilla. Do you remember hearing him?
His name sounds very familiar.
He was one of the 80s instrumental guys like Gary Hoey and this whole school.
Greg Howe kind of.
Yeah, just really, but he's really, really good. And anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there and invite anyone, if you're a Ronnie Montrose fan. And of course, at the end, you got Sammy Hagar comes out with Joe Satriani. Right. And then the original bass player and drummer Bill Church and Denny Carmassi, who were in Montrose, they come out and do a few songs at the end. But to me, the high point is the Gamma set. And that's actually the longest one, which surprised me. That's the longest part in this video. They did like 5 songs, and then Sammy comes out and they only do like 2 songs as Montrose. But anyways,
cool
if you're looking for good rock and roll, that's one you need to check out.
Absolutely.
And also, John, again, it's been a while since we've gotten together. I just wanted to thank the folks that are joining us as patrons on Patreon. We've got a number of folks, not a lot yet, but it's slowly but surely we're getting folks that are being patrons. And for as little as $3 a month, there's a $3 level, $6 level, and $12 level, I think. So if you enjoy the podcast, it's things like Patreon that allow us to, well, we talked about upgrading some equipment.
Right.
We're able to do that because we have patrons and things. So
we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So if that's something you'd like to do, check us out on Patreon.
And also, if you want to check out our website, it's really cool. It's got a lot of cool stuff on it. And we do go a little further in detail with, I put up photos that are cool and some cool videos that we talk about, that kind of stuff. So there's more content on the webpage.
And that's what I like. John started adding videos, and they're not necessarily videos from our channel, that's what makes it cool. Right. Is we talk about a song or whatever, and John will post, here's a video of a guy playing this song. It's cool. So yeah, if you like to go down, and that's what I love to do on YouTube, is I'll watch a video and then the related videos. And before long, you've gone in a completely different direction. And that's what's cool.
And because of like YouTube's algorithm, the more cool videos you watch, the more cool videos you get to see.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Yeah, check out our webpage.
Today I was on a Norm Macdonald thing. I was going down Norm Macdonald hole. But anyways.
Rest his soul.
Yeah. All right. So I am very excited about this album, and there are a lot of Robin Trower fans out there. I just put a little blurb on Twitter. By the way, follow us on Twitter. Just look up the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast, and you'll find us there. A lot of folks, big time Robin Trower fans. So this is going to be a fun album to talk about. Now, when we come back, we'll talk about that. But before we go to break here, I just want to tell you about one of our sponsors. We've talked about them before, and they are a great company. This is a company called Heart, Soul, Heat, and they are a sponsor of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Heart, Soul, Heat, they are the creators of Ghost Honey, which is a 100% American-made hot honey. It is raw honey that is ghost pepper infused. So if you're a fan of hot stuff, and that might scare you when you say that, it's not so hot that it's going to scorch your tongue, but it's zippy. It's pretty hot, but I like it kind of hot. But this is 100% American-made hot honey, ghost pepper infused raw honey. It's great on pizza, on fried chicken. I was telling John last time I had it on chicken strips, and it was awesome.
Sounds great.
It's really good. It is bold and flavorful without overpowering your favorite foods. And they are offering fans of the Classic Guitar Rock podcast 50% off your first order, which is awesome. Yeah, 50% off your first order. You just enter the code ROCK, ROCK, at heartsoulheat.com. That's heartsoulheat.com. Use that promo code ROCK at checkout, and you get 50% off your first order. So it's awesome. And we just want to thank Heart Soul Heat for being a sponsor. And if you could support those sponsors, that's a great thing.
And it's an American company, too.
American company. Didn't you say in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
Is that where they're located? Yeah. Awesome. So, yeah, check that out. Now, when we come back, we're going to dig into this classic album from 1974, Robin Trower's Bridge of Sighs.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
If it's too loud, you're too old. Well, let's be honest. You're probably too old anyway. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Jeremy and John here today, and we are excited to be talking about a great album from 1974. This is Bridge of Sighs by Robin Trower. And Robin Trower is one of those guys, John, that gets lumped into the Hendrix disciple category, right? Which you understand why. You hear some of that.
Yeah, you do hear that.
Yeah. But I think about the time period. Okay, so this is mid-70s, 74.
Is Hendrix dead at this point?
He's dead. He's died in 1970. But he was very impactful, right? So there were some. Uli John Roth, who was in Scorpions at the time, very much Hendrix. I hear more Hendrix in Uli than I do in Robin Trower. And I made this point earlier to John. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but it's a podcast. Why not? It's our podcast. We can do whatever we want. So, blues. Let's talk about blues for just a minute. So,
would you say this is a blues record?
I would say he's a very bluesy guitarist. But you said something really interesting. You said a lot of these songs to you aren't really rock songs.
I would say this is not a rock album.
Yeah,
per se. I mean, if you compare this to like Led Zeppelin, this is not a rock. This is not a rock album.
It's not a super up tempo album. There's a lot of mid to low tempo songs.
Right.
When you think about it, there's maybe three songs that I'd call rockers up tempo. And the rest are, to your point, they're pretty mellow.
And another thing is the track lengths are relatively long.
Yeah.
And that doesn't allow for a lot of radio play. That's one thing that happens.
Yeah.
You go to a concept album and you have all these long tracks, odds are you're not going to be played much.
And I wanted to talk about blues for just a minute because there's blues, and I know blues kind of came into vogue in the 80s. You know, all the old white guys were into blues, right? You go to a blues show and all it was a bunch of old white guys, right? But when you go back to the source material, and I like blues as much as anyone, but you go back to the source material, you go back to a Muddy Waters album, a Howlin' Wolf album, John Lee Hooker album.
yeah.
The actual albums from the 50s and 60s, they are not real accessible.
Right.
I mean, it's the sound is not great.
They're all recorded with one track and one take.
Totally. One track, one take. And let's be honest, a lot of these, there are exceptions. But, and I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but one John Lee Hooker song sounds just like another John Lee Hooker song. and there were exceptions. Buddy Guy, phenomenal. And Buddy Guy, in fact, a lot of people will say Hendrix ripped a lot of stuff off from Buddy Guy.
Probably, yeah.
And Buddy Guy's, from a guitar standpoint, it was just crazy. I mean, he was out there, but the sound of those albums is not very good.
Right. I mean, they're not great. I mean, I think they were recorded not on tape. I think they were recorded right to the wax.
They might have done that. Absolutely. And so, and I'm just throwing that out because Hendrix comes along. Hendrix was very much versed in the blues, right? He played on the Chitlin circuit playing R&B. He was in James Brown's band, or Little Richard, not James Brown, Little Richard's band for a while. So he was rooted in the blues, but then he took it in this whole different direction. And so the point I'm trying to make is this. When people say, yeah, I love the blues, what they're really saying is they like the post-British
adoption
blues rock.
Right.
Now, I can't speak for everyone because some guys might really like that old T-Bone Walker stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, I'll just admit it. I like the second generation blues stuff, which we wouldn't have without the original blues. But once you had John Mayall and the British guys electrifying the blues and making it blues rock, I like that stuff better. And so Trower is a bridge between bridge. See how I did that?
We get it.
He's a bridge between Hendrix, who was this psychedelic guy who brought in, he was groundbreaking, right? He was just groundbreaking. Yeah, some of the visuals, some of the crazy stuff he might have borrowed from Buddy Guy, but in terms of this way out space alien type stuff he's playing, he was a really cutting edge. And to me, then Robin Trower is closer to this blues rock mold that you'd see later with Stevie Ray Vaughan and people like that. So if you're a Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, you'd probably really like this album, in my mind.
And also, like, there's like this myth or that, Jimi Hendrix was great.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if you listen to some of his older tapes and stuff like that, he recorded and recorded and recorded and recorded, and he did so much stuff that was never heard.
Right.
And there's a reason why they're not heard.
Exactly.
Because it's not
that great. And he's not even in tune.
Right. Yeah.
but phenomenal. Right?
Phenomenal playing.
Yeah.
But yeah. There's no one's perfect, but I mean, to me, Hendrix is a little less accessible than, let's say, Led Zeppelin.
Right. Some of it, I think, is time too. And I've, if you go back, John, and listen to some of this is a rant I get on all the time. In the 60s, right? With the advent of stereo, you get a lot of albums where they abuse it.
Oh, yes.
So, and Hendrix, you listen to Are You Experienced? And, it drives me crazy when you got the drums panned hard left and the guitars all on the right.
You have your headphones on, you start turning your head to get this,
exactly
to get the drums centered,
And I just, some of that would drive me crazy, listening to that. But we move along from 1967 to 1974. And to me, the 70s to me are the golden age of album production.
Oh, that was everything, album production.
Yeah. And you even said it. You said the first time you played this album, you said, I'm surprised at how good it sounds.
It sounds really good.
Yeah. And the drum sounds are good.
And there's very few overdubs. I think maybe 2 or 3 songs have 2 guitar parts.
Right.
And I don't think they were, I wasn't there in the session, obviously, but I don't think they were overdubbing solos.
Right.
I think they started on measure 1 and ended when and that was the end of the song.
Yeah.
I don't think they did much overdubbing at all.
Now there's one song, I can't remember which one it is. It might be Two Rolling Stone. There's one where the lead guitar sound is very different from the main rhythm guitar.
Right. I think that's it.
And which is kind of cool, that it's obvious this is not just, he recorded a rhythm track and he goes back and he's playing lead. It's obvious that he has a completely different guitar sound for his solo as he did for the rhythm. But you're right, there's not a whole lot of overdubs on it.
So doing a deep dive, I found on Wikipedia that the engineer for this album was Roland Emmerich.
Okay.
And he's the big time BBC, Apple. He's the one that basically recorded all the Beatles stuff. So that's why I think it sounds so amazing. But in terms of like tone, I mean, I looked at what he was doing, and like modern guitar players have a whole plethora of pedals.
An arsenal.
And everything. You can get any kind of sound you want to.
Yeah.
And you think back in 1974, there wasn't much technology for guitar.
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing that really stands out is that big Marshall lead sound.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got like a 100-watt Marshall in a recording space, and it is cranked.
Yep.
So what you get at that point is you get the guitar goes into the preamp's inside the head, and then you have a preamp distortion, plus you have power amp distortion, and that is a completely different beast instead of having a pedal. When you have these big 100-watt Marshalls cranked open, it is just a completely different sound. Plus, when you're in a room with you have your guitar on, and you're in a room with a very cranked amp, there is kind of like a synergy that goes on between. It starts.
Yeah, the guitar and the amp literally become connected because you're getting the sound of the guitar coming back through, and
that's this massive sound you get. And then he uses two pedals kind of. So he uses the Univibe. That's that kind of
and he uses the crap out of that.
And he uses a wah.
Right.
And also a lot of the tones he's getting is called a cocked wah. So a wah for guitar players is a pedal. It's basically like a tone control on a guitar, but you put it on your foot and you can go wah, wah, wah. But what he's doing is he's putting it in a position and just holding it there. So he's just holding it like halfway open or halfway closed. And that's the sound you hear so much. It like sounds so different.
And that's a Michael Schenker trick too. He has a wah on his pedal board that he hardly ever uses the wah. He's got it in a certain position and he just leaves it there. Have you seen, it's funny you mention that. You might have seen this. So, oh gosh, what's the company that makes his pedals now? I can't remember what it is. We can look it up. We'll get it for you. But they made him
a
cocked wah pedal.
Yeah, you've got a dial on it.
It doesn't even have the pedal. It's just, you just set it. And so it sounds like a half open wah-wah pedal for that exact sound that you're talking about. Yeah, that's a big part of his sound.
And that's not a modern guitar sound.
No.
I can't name a record in the last 30 years that had a cocked wah as a prominent sound on it. I just can't think of one. But it's really prominent in here. You hear these guitar tones that don't sound completely like a Strat because I play Strats.
Right.
And this album doesn't sound Stratty to me.
Right.
I guess Sanders doesn't sound too Stratty either on a lot of tracks, but I think that comes from the power amp distortion he's getting. He's being really close to the amp, and he's got that cocked wah, and it doesn't really sound like a traditional Stratocaster.
And it's interesting you say that. We'll get to that in a minute. Let me just talk a little bit about Robin Trower's background. I saw an interview, I think it's a couple years old, 2 or 3 years old, and Robin Trower he's 76. Okay. He was born in 1945. Does that make him 76? That's probably
I was not a math major.
Yeah. So he's not a young guy, right?
He's old.
And this interview I was telling John earlier is if you were just walking by and not paying attention to what they were talking about, you would assume they were talking to a
roadie,
or
like an old roadie,
or even like an old retired school teacher in Great Britain or something, because he's very soft spoken. He doesn't look like a rock and roll guy at all.
That reminds me.
He looks like your grandpa.
So a couple of years ago in town here, we have a casino that plays live concerts, and we rented a hotel room there one night to go to a concert. And I went down to the fitness center to do some jogging, and I saw this guy. And I thought, this is a rock star.
Yeah.
He looked like a rock star. He acted like a rock star. I didn't say a word to him.
Right.
But I knew this guy is in the band. He plays guitar. Later that night, I saw him. But I was like, he throws off this incredible, like, I'm a rock star. I think he was playing for Melissa Etheridge or somebody like
Cool.
that. But he was really a nice guy. But with Robin Trower, you don't see this huge rock star.
No, not at all.
It doesn't read like I'm a monster on guitar.
Right. And he's just very soft spoken. And like I said, it was like an interview with your grandpa. And that's what happens when you turn 76, you know? So, but anyways, he was born in 1945. He was in Procol Harum. Now, Procol Harum is known for the hit, their only big hit, Whiter Shade of Pale.
That's it.
Right? Which is a great song, but it's an organ song. It's not a guitar song. And actually, Trower didn't join until after they'd already released that. So he came in right after they had this hit with A Whiter Shade of Pale, and he played with them for a number of years. But yeah, that's not really a guitar song. And I haven't really seen him, other stuff he's played with Procol Harum. So I don't know how much guitar input he actually had, but he was in with them for a number of years. But then, finally kind of went out on his own, and Bridge of Sighs is his second album.
True.
And as much as I like his guitar playing, this singer, James Dewar, he's a Scottish guy. He died in 2002.
I didn't know he's Scottish.
Yeah, he's Scottish. He's phenomenal.
He's really good.
And I'm like, why is this guy not more of a household name as a singer, right? He's in that Paul Rogers bluesy school, but just a really good singer and a really good bass player.
Yeah, he's
tasty. It's just really good
love
stuff.
I love the bass tune. So you're talking about the keyboard player for Procol Harum was Matthew Fisher.
Yes.
And Matthew Fisher produced this album. He produced Bridge of Sighs. And, in the liner notes, it's mentioned that, there's only 3 people on the album, but you can hear B3 and
there's
a couple
some organ
tracks.
in a few places.
Very light,
Which just reinforces the point that producers have a lot to do with the sound of an album.
Absolutely.
We've talked about that before. We could do we need to do a Mutt Lange episode at some point.
As long as we do a Shania Twain one too.
Well, that's the whole thing. You could, but yeah, the producers have a huge impact. So this album comes out in 1974, and the James Dewar is the bass player, and the drummer is Reg Isidore. And again, we never really hear about these guys, but in terms of the musicianship, it's awesome. It's a great album. I did think it was interesting. Bridge of Sighs. What does that mean? What's Bridge of Sighs mean? And the Bridge of Sighs is a bridge that's part of that old prison is it in Venice? I think it's in Venice. And so when convicts were getting sent to the big house, they're being locked up for the rest of their life, they'd walk over this Bridge of Sighs, which goes over the water, in Venice. And that was where you'd see your last long look before you go into the dungeon.
I bet a dungeon in Venice was very wet.
Yeah, mold on the walls. But that's where that comes from, is that Bridge of Sighs. It's just a little historical thing. And there wasn't really any significance to that other than he just liked the sound of the name of it.
So I read back. Actually, the story was that he liked the name of a horse.
That was called, that's what it is.
Yeah,
okay.
Like a racehorse that was called Bridge of Sighs, and he just called the album Bridge of Sighs, or wrote a song after it. And then later he finds out it's
then he finds out the history. Yeah. So what's the picture on the front of the album? Did you see any? What is that supposed to represent?
It's kind of a sand dune.
That's what it looks like to me. The very first release, the picture was upside down, but see, no one could tell. It's like, really? How is that upside down?
It's like the White Album. What side goes up?
Yeah. It's like, okay, so if it's upside down, big deal. But apparently it was upside down, but then they fixed it on subsequent pressings.
I don't think the album cover does this
no, it doesn't.
album justice.
It's just a nondescript. You can't tell what it is.
It's like somebody's navel, I think.
That's kind of like a navel
belly
or
button.
something. It's kind of a weird thing. But as far as the album goes, it's a great album. So here's an interesting story too, and we're going to go down another rabbit trail here, John. You're a Strat player.
Yep.
And if you're not if you're a guitar player, you'll understand this. If you're not, just a little background here. So you got your Stratocaster, you got your Gibson, with humbuckers, and every guitar is really kind of a variation of those two.
Exactly.
And
except maybe solid or semi-hollow.
Yeah, a semi-hollow
like
body.
Like an ES335.
Right. And
a little bit different take.
A little different. But even with those, you got a guy like Alvin Lee or Ted Nugent that would play hollow bodies. They still got the humbuckers, and most guys are in one camp or the other. I'm a Strat guy.
Or I'm a
Gibson guy.
Yeah.
And you just get, like, for me, if I'm playing clean, I want a Strat.
Correct.
But if I'm playing dirty, I like humbuckers, right?
Right.
And so some people, John has one on his wall here. They'll take a Strat and stick a humbucker in it. So
right.
kind of the best of both worlds.
And I didn't come up with that idea. That
right.
was Eddie Van Halen.
He would take this Strat, stick a humbucker in it, and then they'd call the super Strats, what they call super Strats, which is a Stratocaster style guitar with the humbuckers that you could, kind of get the best of both worlds. So Robin, in the Procol Harum days, in the early days, he was a Gibson guy.
Really?
He played humbuckers, and then I think they were opening a show in the early days for Jethro Tull.
Gotcha.
And Martin Barr, who's the guitar player for Jethro Tull, who's really good, he had his Strat, and he plays Les Pauls too, but he had a Strat sitting on the stand, just leaning up there. And it's funny when Robin Trower tells the story, he says, so I was kind of naughty and I picked up his guitar without asking, but
that is a no-no.
Yeah. Well,
if you're a guitar player,
you're not supposed to do that.
You don't touch other people's stuff. I mean, if you ever want to see people kind of just, take a step back from you, you touch their guitar without that.
Yeah. Well, he picked it up and he touched it. And he said, this is the sound. This is the sound I've been hearing in my head. This is the sound. When he picked up that Strat through a Marshall, and from then on, he's been a Strat guy. But to your point, he doesn't sound really Stratty.
He does
It's not. And again, we don't need to get too much in the weeds, but you can listen to even a Ritchie Blackmore when he's got tons of gain and overdrive. You can still tell it's a Strat.
There's a certain single coils give a certain articulation in the high end and the top end.
Yeah, it's a little
splanky.
Splanky's a good word. It's a little more biting, right? Where the overdrive you get with the humbucker, to me, sounds a little smoother, creamier. Yeah, there's all these words that mean nothing, right?
Yeah, guitar's always
But that's how he stumbled on the Strat. And John, you talked about the pedals that he uses, and that was and he's pretty much stuck with that recipe forever.
Yeah. The thing the recording, there's no noise on it. If you're ever in a room with a 100 watt Marshall hooked up to a Strat that has single coils on it,
yep,
they will hum like crazy, but you don't hear it on this album.
Right. And again, for non-guitar players, single coil pickups, you got single coils, you got double coils. Double coils are called humbuckers.
Because they buck the hum.
Because they buck the hum, right? So they're quieter. So there's something about the double wraps.
They go in opposite directions.
So it cancels out the noise. So humbuckers are quieter, but you get a Strat, and Strats will pick up interference from radio,
fluorescent lights. I used to have a fun time when I would get
the radio.
I had a tube TV, and I'd get my guitar next to it, and it would pick up the guitar, or pick up the TV.
And I can remember actually hearing the radio come through my guitar on single coils, right? Or if you use an unshielded cable,
right,
you get the same type of thing. But to your point is, it's amazing. You got this cranked amp, and you got single coils, and it'd have to be really
there is no
noisy.
Noise on it. I was I listened to it like intently, like where is the noise?
Mm-hmm.
Like some albums they'll do a before they start the first note, they'll crank the noise, and you're like, and then they start playing, and they turn the noise down. But it's the technology to reduce noise. I don't know if it existed back then, and I don't know how they did it.
Yeah. It's the sound is really good. And, there's a few albums from that time frame. This is one. You were mentioning some of the big albums from 74. 74 was a good year.
Oh, I haven't mentioned those albums.
Oh, you have? Yeah, we were talking beforehand. But one that came out in 73, which is one of my all-time favorite albums, is ZZ Top's Tres Hombres. And it's the same way. You listen to that, and it sounds better than albums that came out in the 80s. It sounds better. The drums sound better. The guitar sounds are better. And this album is like that. It just sounds, it's a great sounding album. And all the albums from that time didn't sound that great.
No.
I mean, you look at a Kiss album, and I'm not picking on Kiss as musicians, but the actual sound of their albums, the drums were weaker sounding. They were flatter. The guitars didn't sound as good. BTO, you listen to it didn't sound as good as this album sounds.
It sounds, I would love to have this sound.
Yeah.
Of his guitar sound, and have the presence and the detail.
Yeah.
There's no like muddy middle.
Yeah.
It's just, everything is distinct. You can hear every part, and it's a great sounding album. It's really good.
Yeah. So just for context, mention some of the albums that came out in 74.
Well, I was doing some research, and I found a site that had it. It says loudersound.com. They get a little free pitch there. So some of the albums that came out, this is the competition that Robin Trower was kind of facing at the time, which was, here's a couple albums. So Aerosmith had Get Your Wings.
Okay, great album.
Great album. Bad Company had Bad Company.
That's a good album.
We have David Bowie with Diamond Dogs.
Okay.
Eric Clapton had 461 Ocean Boulevard.
Okay.
That was an interesting album. And then we have Deep Purple.
Which Deep Purple album
is it? This is Burn.
Burn. Oh, this is the first one with
David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes.
Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. It's a great album. But you know what? Burn, from a production standpoint, I don't think Burn sounds as good as this Robin Trower album.
It does. Yeah. I haven't heard Burn, but this Robin Trower sounds great.
Yeah.
So we got Genesis has The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Yeah.
It is the adventures of a New York street urchin named Rael. In case you were wondering. Yeah. And there's a Judas Priest album came out called Rock-a-Rolla.
Rock-a-Rolla.
Kiss had an album called Kiss.
There it is. Man, 74 was a big year. Rush, that's...
Rush came out too.
That's the Fly By Night album in 74, right? Isn't it? Or is that their debut album?
That's their debut album.
That's actually. Right. Okay, so
there's... At the time... Psychedelia is over and done.
It really kind of is. It's based on those bands.
It's like the hair metal of the '90s. You didn't have nobody listened to hair metal,
right?
So you have the long play album because Dark Side of the Moon made so much money.
Mm-hmm.
So our record companies were looking to kind of capitalize on it with album sales, not singles, but albums.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you have these. They were signing acts that could produce a full album of music and a concept album. That's why you have such diverse music. But nowadays we don't have that.
And here's what's interesting. And there's this album has I wouldn't call it a theme. It's not a theme album, but it has a vibe, right? It has
it's got a timbre,
and an atmosphere.
Yeah.
So a good example, Bridge of Sighs, which is the second track going into In This Place.
Right.
It's got this kind of wind sound effect. And again, so I hadn't really thought about it in context of Dark Side of the Moon, but Dark Side of the Moon does that. You get a sound effect that just kind of takes you right into the next thing. So you got some of this on this. But it's almost like the song Bridge of Sighs and In This Place are almost like this part of the same song.
Right. Different movements.
Different movements of the same song because they kind of have the same, I don't want to say dark, but it's not your typical upbeat, like you said, singles type music, right?
This is kind of I would say this is more of headphone music than party music.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it.
You know,
it's a good way to say it.
At the end of the day, you put your hi-fi on, you put your headphones on, you crank it up.
And it's, you know, I haven't really listened to this in headphones. I mostly have listened in my car.
Yeah.
Is where I listen to it. But yeah, and that's a good, you said it earlier. You know who Malcolm Gladwell is. The writer Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
He's wrote Blink and Tipping Point and these phenomenal books. So I saw a presentation he gave. He's a really smart guy.
Yeah, Mensa smart kind of.
Mensa smart. And you wouldn't think so. He's a huge sports fan and a huge music fan.
Oh.
And so he'll talk about these. And so he talks about, which book was he promoting? I can't remember which book it was. This was in probably 12, 15 years ago. So it's been a while. And he talks about Fleetwood Mac. And he talks about how the Fleetwood Mac that we all think of, Fleetwood Mac with Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham.
and
So when the Fleetwood Mac album came out, this was the one right before Rumors. When the Fleetwood Mac album came out in like 75, that was the 13th Fleetwood Mac album.
Right.
And the point he was trying to make is that there could never be a Fleetwood Mac these days.
Right.
No record company would give a band 13 albums.
13 tries to
13 tries to get
make a
massive
commercial
success,
yes.
right? And so this was a time, there couldn't be a Robin Trower today, really.
I don't think so.
So this was a time when record companies would gamble. That's a good way to look at it. And you mentioned Dark Side. Dark Side paid off, huge album. That album was in the top 40 for like 15 years, 20 years.
I think it's
Something
still
ridiculous.
in the top 100.
It's ridiculous. But to your point, I think that probably did allow for some of these more experimental type albums to come out.
Part of the thing was that rock music was relatively new.
Yeah.
You know, so I think what happened was that the record companies, you know, in the 80s, they figured out how to make hits. They figured out how to make money, because an album, a record company isn't in the business to make records. It's in the business to sell records.
Absolutely. It's not about the art. And so,
so they refined this process, which we have now.
Right.
Which is, you have 15 songwriters on one song for Taylor Swift, and that thing's going to go number one for like 4 weeks.
Right.
You know, you have, but that whole like manufacturing,
and that's what it's become.
Didn't exist back then.
It's become a process. It's become a manufactured product. Frank Zappa, there's a great interview. We're really getting in the weeds, but that's okay. That's okay. So Frank Zappa talks about how in the early days, the guys making records, they were in it for money too, right? They were businessmen. But he said it was way better working with these business guys that didn't know a thing about music, right? Because they just say, yeah, boys, do what you want, you know? And then he said, once you get into the 70s and then it's all about A&R, and then you get the experts.
Right.
You know, he said, yeah, and now these guys were hip and had long hair and they're smoking pot. But he said they wouldn't give us near the freedom that the old guys that looked like they were from Mad Men would, you know? And I just think that's very interesting. And in the 80s, I really saw it. I was working in radio at the time. That's where I first started paying attention. And there have always been producers' bands, right? The Monkees, you know, we talk about the 60s and so many of those 60s
there's
acts.
been a lot of manufacturing.
That's always happened.
I think The Who was kind of in that.
Could be.
And I think the Rolling Stones were kind of got manufactured a little bit too.
Yeah. But by the time the 80s rolled around, then it really became it was a formula, like you mentioned. It was let's do this. We need this type of sound. We need this type of...
The lead singer's got to be a blonde.
Exactly.
Some of the band has to have dark hair to separate them.
Totally.
You know,
and so it became a manufacturer. It became about the product instead of the art. It's always been about the product. I mean, they've always had to sell, but Fleetwood Mac, you know, the record company, 13 albums until they have a big breakthrough. And that would not happen today.
And I think some of the things the industry is doing now is they kind of own everything. So back in the day, you would hopefully own your masters if you could, and you would try to get publishing rights, whatever. Right. But now, the idea was that the tour, if you went on a tour, the tour would promote album sales within that region. Right. Because people go, I'm going to buy the album before I go to the concert, obviously.
Or right after I see the concert. Right.
You know, and then you throw away, you give some tickets to their local rock station and they would promote you. Right. And then the DJs get to hang backstage and pretend like they're cool.
Yeah, exactly.
But now it's like the record label owns everything. They own their likeness, they own their signatures, they own their Twitters and their YouTubes, and they own the concerts. They own the t-shirt sales, they own everything.
And another great channel, check out Full in Bloom on YouTube. All this guy does is interview people. So listen to an interview with Don Dokken, and he said, record companies are banks. That's all they are.
Yes.
They are loaning the bands money.
Right.
But you got to pay it all back.
So
he said by the time we'd each made $1 million, the record company had probably made $50 million.
Right.
And when it gets really tragic, and be realistic, if you're a young person and this is our big chance, you're going to do whatever they tell you to do. And that's why you had people like Willie Dixon, and it happened to the black artists more than anyone, that would die penniless.
Absolutely.
Because they just got taken to the cleaners by the record companies.
They give them $10 or
$10. Yeah, we'll buy this song for $10. Yeah. And then Led Zeppelin was one of the biggest perpetrators of their first albums. They would just say songs by Page Plant, they would take credit for these Robert Johnson or Willie Dixon songs.
Right.
They had to go back and rectify that over the years, but I mean, that happened.
Yeah.
So we're really getting in the weeds
here.
That's all right. It's a good conversation. So, John, when we come back, I want each of us to kind of share, I don't want to go track by track necessarily, but let's talk about our high points as we go through this album. We're talking, of course, about Bridge of Sighs, 1974 album from Robin Trower. That's what we're supposed to be talking about anyways. So we'll actually get back on track. We'll talk about our high points from the album when we come back right here in the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. I'm Jeremy London with my partner, John Dimke.
Hello.
We are talking about Bridge of Sighs from 1974 by Robin Trower. And I'm going to put you on the spot first, John.
Do it.
So what are the high points? What are the songs that you gravitate to?
If I could break this down, I wouldn't necessarily call this strictly a rock album. I think I would say it's more of a soul album. And more
I'll give you that.
I think there's even a funk song on there. I guess I like that. The ballad called About to Begin.
That's a great one. That's the one I was listening to as I pulled up, by the way.
It's almost uncharacteristic for this album because I was expecting, from the first track and second track, third track. But when this track came on, I was like, this is something very different.
Yeah.
It has the same sound, the same feel, but it's a different song. And I like that one. So it had a B3 organ in it, and it's probably from the guy. And also the vocals had an effect on them.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they used because they didn't have a lot of effects back then. There's something on the vocals that make it sound warbling,
kind of
haunting.
swirly. Yeah.
Maybe they
haunting is the good. I was going to say melancholy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's contemplative.
Yeah, I like that word.
Yeah, but I really like that track. And I liked the fifth track, Too Rolling Stoned.
Yep. That's, to me, if this album has a hit, because I've actually heard that song on classic rock radio.
I have too.
That's I've maybe heard Bridge of Sighs, but
I think
I've heard Too Rolling Stone, KKZX, that's a classic rock station here in town.
Right.
They used to play that. Yeah.
But my definition of that song is, if I'm going to classify it, it's going to be a funk song. That is a funk song, straight up and down.
Yeah,
I think if you change the instruments a little bit and had a little more,
that is a funky song. I'll give you that.
That is I think it's a funk song. So those are the two I really like.
Okay, I wanted to go back to that About to Begin.
Gotcha.
And I don't know why I told John this. To me, that song reminds me of if you go and watch a Charles Bronson movie, Charles Bronson, like the Death Wish movies or whatever, or
bad wig,
or The Mechanic. Yeah, he was just an ugly dude. How did that guy get to me?
I don't know. Telly Savalas. I mean,
there's some ugly dudes.
There's a lot of ugly people on TV in the 70s.
But there's that whole mid 70s. I just see the beginning of a Charles Bronson movie. It'll have like mellow music and show the city in the background or whatever as they're playing the opening. That has that cinematic feel to me. And I was thinking of a Charles Bronson soundtrack when I saw that, but I love that song.
That's a great name for a band.
The
Charles Bronson soundtrack.
Put the at the beginning. The Charles Bronson soundtrack. That's a good one. Okay. So I really I'll call them the big three. In fact, one of our Patreon supporters, Lauren, who sends us emails, Lauren's great, but she refers to the big three. The big three: Day of the Eagle, Bridge of Sighs, Too Rolling Stoned. And I tend to agree those are the big three. But I also really like About to Begin, and I really like In This Place. So I talked about Bridge of Sighs and In This Place being kind of down, and they are. But they're just really well done, and I like the sound, the guitar. Everything about this album is very tasteful, right?
That's the word, tasteful.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing overdone. Sometimes you get like the Def Leppard with Mutt Lange we mentioned earlier.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, how many instruments you playing?
Exactly. How many? Let's get 80 backing vocals on this track. Yeah, totally. But I really like. Day of the Eagle is a great song to kick it off. And it's weird. It's a weird rhythmic thing. I was trying to kind of play along.
Where is the one?
They drop a note somewhere and it's kind of tricky until it kicks in. But I love Day of the Eagle. And I don't know, there's something about putting them on a turntable, right? You set it down, you hear that little at the beginning and then it kicks in. And this is an album I have on vinyl and I just love to hear it on vinyl. But I would say the big three, right? Day of the Eagle, Bridge of Sighs, Too Rolling Stoned. Oh, Lady Love is a good song too. I kind of like that.
They're all really good.
Yeah. You can't say that there's any bad songs on it, but it's also, it's not like you're going to put on an AC/DC album and party, right. This is a little more, you use the word contemplative, right? Contemplative, however you say it. This is a little more, I don't want to use the word dark. It's not necessarily dark, but it's, what's the word I'm looking for?
I think it's mature.
Mature. That's a good word for it.
Like if
Kiss,
no offense to Kiss, but Kiss is not really.
No, they're not going to do a Bridge of
songs
Sighs.
like Love Rocket and Lick It Up. That's not exactly Bridge of Sighs, you know?
Yeah. They tried to do that with The Elder, by the way. One of the all-time crappy albums, by the way. That's a whole nother subject. We're going to do a Kiss episode sometime, John. Those are mine. So it's a shame that, I mean, diehard music fans are probably aware of Robin Trower, right? But he hasn't really had mainstream. He's always played, right? So he still plays.
According to his website, trowerpower.com.
Trower Power.
He had to postpone a tour in 2020 because of COVID. So
right.
I think he might have dates too. But if you get a chance, check out his Facebook page. He has 334,000 followers.
Okay, so
that is huge.
He's got an audience.
He's got a big audience.
And I think he hasn't gotten a lot of radio airplay to build that audience. No. I think he's done it the hard way. He's toured forever.
I think he's kind of like Iron Maiden a little bit, meaning that Iron Maiden they never got airplay.
Not really. No.
Yeah, and they tour and tour and tour.
They built their. They never stopped. Right. They built their following. They earned it the hard way. Right. And a lot of Cheap Trick is that way. Cheap Trick has had a few big hits, but they have never stopped. They've always, and they have a rabid following. Yeah, Iron Maiden's exactly the same way. Someone mentioned to me that they had seen, again, this has become I bring this up a lot, but this is just the reality of it. All of these guys that we listened to as teenagers, right? None of us are teenagers anymore. No. I'm 54 years old, right? So
I'll be 52 in a month and a half.
So these guys that were in their 30s when we were kids, well, they're in their 70s and 80s.
Right.
So what's my point? My point is, man, we got to enjoy these guys while they're still doing it.
And another thing is, I think guitar players and musicians in general fare better than singers.
I agree.
I agree. I think a lot of those singers, when they wrote their parts when they were younger, they had a much higher register, and they could do a lot more things vocally, and just years and years and years of gravity on your vocal cords, they just can't do it anymore.
And a guy can still play the guitar into his 70s, right?
Yeah.
The one point I wanted to make was that it might have been someone on Twitter who responded, when I said we were going to be doing this album on our Twitter. They said, yeah, I went and saw him, and he actually came up to the stage with a walker.
Wow.
And I don't think he always uses a walker, but maybe he had surgery or something. But this person's like, oh, no. But they said they handed him a guitar, and he just plow, and it was like, whoa, this guy's awesome, But just you see we never want to think of our idols as using a walker.
Are human.
They are human. That's right. And it's hard for us to realize that.
Would you want to be 75 years old and you got a gig? Would you use your walker to get there? I sure as heck would.
Well, and that's the thing and here's the thing. And I've gotten in arguments with people when they say, yeah, those guys need to just give it up. And I'm like, why? This is what they love doing.
Right. If you can play it decently,
you can play it.
And some bands just can't.
Yeah. And that's true. But again, even if they're one of those bands, if there are still, Kiss is a perfect example, right? End of the road, people are saying, Paul Stanley can't sing anymore. He could never really sing that great. But the point is, if people are still willing to go out and pay to see these guys, I wouldn't. Who am I to tell them they need to give it up?
Absolutely.
And some of these guys, especially the mid tier, this is how they support themselves.
Right.
They didn't make tons of money because record companies have traditionally ripped them off. They don't have a whole lot of money.
Right. They took most of their royalties from them.
And we assume that because someone was famous at one point that they're just all rich. That's not the case.
That is not the case.
So, anyways, we went all over the place.
We went on.
It was good.
I apologize for that too.
No apologies needed.
We're just two guys that like guitar, talking about it.
We can get in the weeds.
We'll get in some weeds.
Yeah, I would love your thoughts. So email us, right? classicguitarrock@mail.com. You can always go to Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube.
And the website.
And the website. Well, yeah, that's your first place to go is you go to the website and you can get to everything from there. So that's your home base, classicguitarrock.com. Check it out. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I don't want to put you on the spot, John, but we need some ideas for the next episode. Do we want to commit to one right now, or should we talk about that?
If you're going to put me on the spot, I'm going to say let's do new wave.
New wave classic rock, though, right?
Right,
so
right.
Like,
I'm talking like Dave Byrne, Talking Heads, Blondie, that kind of stuff.
I love it. So our next episode, we're going to talk about the new wave tinged classic rock. That'll be awesome.
And if any of you listeners out there have any ideas of bands that we should cover for that, please share it. You can tweet us. You can put it on Facebook. You can do anything.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. John, thank you, sir.
Thank you for letting me be here.
And we'll see you on the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Rock on.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Oh, sweetly.
Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com.
We're not ordinary people. We're morons.
We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.